Good morning everyone, hope you're all doing alright. Today's video is a bit different than my usual. It's a painting tutorial video, so if you want to follow along, now's the time to pause, grab your paintbrushes and let's paint a seascape together. When it comes to painting a seascape, it's important to think about our composition and where we want that horizon line to be. I like to have the horizon line in the sort of bottom section of the painting, and then it sort of opens up the sky so it looks really big and expansive. So that's what we're going to do for this. I don't have a reference photo for this painting, so if you want to follow along and follow exactly what I'm doing, then that's great. If not, feel free to look up some references online. There's absolutely no shame in looking up references and learning from other people's photographs and paintings. It's important to get the horizon line straight or your whole painting might look a bit wonky, so take your time doing that. And then what I'm going to move on to is blocking in the light and dark areas of the sea. I decided to publish this video more in real time rather than trying to speed things up so that you can actually get an idea how long this sort of painting takes. Even though it's quite a simple subject, there's not going to be a whole lot of detail. These things take time, so just enjoy it. Don't stress out about how it's looking as you go along, it will all come together in the end. One of the things that I really love about oil painting is just how relaxing I find it, to be honest. There's other mediums out there and there's plenty more materials to play around with, but if you want something that feels really nice to paint with, then I would always recommend oils. And for some reason there's this misconception that acrylics are the go-to for starting out. I hate using acrylic paints. You won't see me using them unless they're in a paint pour video. I'm just not a fan. There's something about oil paints, okay? They're smooth, they're velvety, and they just make you feel good, okay? So if you've never tried oil paints because you think that you're too beginner and you don't know enough about painting yet, just get black and white. That's partly why I wanted to do the tutorial in black and white, because you don't need a whole range of colours to get you started. If you can just pick two colours, pick the black and white, and then honestly, some of the paintings you'll come out with, you'll be surprised at yourself. I know that there are now water-based oils available on the market, so that's something I've been keeping my eye on, but to be honest, I've got such a lovely collection of traditional oil paints at the moment, I don't want to waste them. So something that was a bit of a downside of using oils for a while was the headaches that I was getting from using the white spirit and turps as a paint thinner and cleaner. So recently I made a switch to this Zest paint thinner and it's lovely. So if you're thinking about, switching to the water-based oils because of the headaches or you just don't like the smell, I would really try this Zest cleaner because honestly it smells great, it doesn't give you the headaches, I think it's non-toxic, non-flammable, so yeah, I'll leave a link for that in the description as well if you want to try it out, and it'll save you getting rid of any of your oil paints because man, they can be expensive. So now we come to our sky, and all I'm doing here is grabbing a big dollop of white paint and applying it wherever feels good. I've not even cleaned the brush at this point. It doesn't matter if you've still got paint left on your brush from doing the sea, unless you've got a solid black paintbrush. Maybe, give it a wee wipe. But I was quite happy just using the white plus the paint that was already on my brush and applying it all over the paper that was left up top. Now, you just want to try and get a nice even coverage, and don't apply it too thickly at this point because when you add in the clouds you want to be able to paint on top of it, so make sure that this is quite a thin layer. Something that I would like to mention is the brushes that I'm using, and although it's only the one that you see here, it's part of a set from Cass Art, and they are the Cass Art synthetic brushes. Now they're their own brand and they're really reasonably priced. I think it's £20 for a pack of 6, so I'll leave them linked in the description box below as well, because these have been my favourite oil brushes that I've found. I've seen a lot that are branded as oil brushes, but then they're so stiff and they just don't move, and I find them a nightmare to use, whereas these ones are lovely and flexible and they work really well with the W&N oil paint. So maybe that's the difference, I don't know, but I really like them and would recommend them. So yeah, I'll leave them linked below for anyone interested. This is a part where a professional artist would probably tell you to put the paintbrushes away, leave this layer to dry for a few days and then come back to it before applying the next layer. However, I'm a working mum. I don't really have time for that. When I get into a painting zone and I've spent the time to put out all the paints and clean the surfaces and all of that nonsense, I just want to get a painting done. And plus, if I look at a painting for too long, I'll eventually decide that I don't like it anymore and it ends up in the bin. So, once we've got that really thin layer of sky in, it's time to move on to the detail. For painting in the clouds, this is why I like to have a really light grey background, because all that I do here is I start to put on white and I just sort of apply that in areas that I think kind of look like clouds. There's no rhyme or reason to how I paint these. I love staring at the sky. I've always been a bit of a daydreamer, so I don't know if that helps, but this is kind of just from memory. Go with the flow here, do what feels good. Once you have in some of those lovely white fluffy clouds, it's time to start adding a bit of drama, and for this I just go straight in with the black. Now, because we're already painting on a slightly wet and grey background, it's not going to be a solid black anyway, so don't stress too much, don't get panicked about putting black on, just don't use too much and you'll be fine. So I'm just starting by applying that in the top left corner here and seeing how we go. For me, the reason I like painting these sort of dramatic seascapes is just to kind of get across a feeling. It's not really about it being perfect or looking exactly like the sky that I've seen at one point in my life. It's just about painting and getting some emotion out on paper. It's good for the soul, this part. Now, this is possibly the only insider tip from me personally that might come in useful, that I don't know if many people do, but when it comes to painting these clouds and getting that really smooth feel, I go in with a dry brush. Now, this might seem obvious to some people, but if you've got sort of really obvious lines between separate areas of clouds, this just helps blend that all together and make it really smooth. This isn't everyone's cup of tea. If you like the big bold brush strokes, by all means leave them in. This is just how I do it. And what I then find is that with that dry brush, I can go in and apply some lighter details, and it just kind of brings it all together. I don't know, there's something magical about using that dry brush to blend in those edges that really works for me. So if you've not tried that before, give it a go. Let me know how you get on in the comments, because honestly, for me, it works a charm. Once I'm happy with how the sky's looking, it's time to go in with my thinner detail brush. This can just help to sort of paint in those long thin clouds and separate them out a little bit, add a wee bit more drama before it's time to then go on and do the thing that I would recommend everyone does with their horizon line, which is to blur it a little bit. So you'll see what I mean in a wee second here, but we're going to go in and just do one finishing touch to that horizon line. Often when you're looking out at the sea, you can't actually see where the sky ends and where the sea begins. It's always kind of got that blurred look, and it can be difficult. Next time you're having a look, if you get the opportunity, have a look at the horizon line and see if you can actually see a solid sharp line. You might be surprised. It's worth pointing out that if you're really happy with the painting you've got in front of you at this point, by all means, put the paintbrushes down. You can go away and make a cup of tea and come back to it with fresh eyes and see what actually needs done. I'd had a tea break at this point and realised that I needed to add in some brighter areas of the sky, so that's what you see me doing here, and I'm not afraid anymore of going in at the end with a big brush. The one thing that annoys me about this brush in particular is the fact that it does shed hairs quite a bit. Now, there are ways that you can try and limit this, but I've tried everything with these brushes and I don't know what it is, but they're just a pain. If they weren't so good, I would get rid of them, but I really like the effect that they give. They're really good for softening areas, so I'll keep them, but just try and make sure as you go along with the painting that you're picking out any hairs that fall off your brush, because trying to move them after your paint's dry isn't going to work. So now it's time to apply the final highlights to our sky area, and to do this you want to make sure that you've got a clean brush with some nice white paint, and take a step back from your painting, see which bits you really want to make pop and just go for it. Don't get too scared, you're nearly at the finish line and it's going to look amazing. So, we've got all of our base layers down. Now it's time to go in with the palette knife. Now I know what you're thinking, the palette knife's scary, you don't want to use it. Trust me, it's fine, okay? Do you know what, see if it doesn't go well, you can just paint over it. It'll be fine, I guarantee you. Don't stress. I think where people go wrong with the palette knife is using it too early on in a painting. I tend to leave it until I'm just about finished for those final highlights. And because I use the wet on wet technique, it's the one thing that really makes those bright whites pop off the page. So that's my tips for it. But let's have a go, see how we go on. So you want to get some white paint on your palette knife and then just drag it lightly across those areas where you can imagine little waves forming. And I tend to put in 3 to 4 sort of chunkier areas with the palette knife, and that's enough, you don't need to overdo it. I'm just going with the flow here, so you can copy along with this, do your own thing. If you want to have a really choppy sea, then by all means, really hammer at it with the palette knife. That can look really cool. Through trial and error, you'll develop your own technique and style for doing this, but my method is to put it on quite lightly in 3 sort of areas, and then what I'll do is go in with a black and paint underneath so that it looks like there's a shadow where the waves are formed. So once I'm happy with the placement of those white areas of the sea, I'm just going to blend them out a tiny little bit because they don't really fit in with the rest of the sea at the moment. So that's what I'm doing here, and you can do this as much or as little as you like. Like I say, if you want a really choppy sea, it's best not to do this part, but for the look that I'm going for this painting, to make it look quite modern, this is the style that I'm doing, so do your own thing. If there's one takeaway that you get from this video, it's here are the basics, but do your own thing. Don't stress. The whole benefit of art is that it's subjective. What one person might love, someone else might hate, so just do your own thing. So I've noticed while trying to paint in these waves that I've lost a little bit of depth, so I'm trying to add a bit of depth back in by applying some black paint before I go on to do the final details with my palette knife. Now, the way that I do the palette knife details for the finishing touches, and I emphasise the finishing bits, is to almost scratch the paper. So you'll see what I mean in a second, but you really want to get a thin coat of paint just on the edge of your palette knife for this part, and just as if you were scratching along the surface. It just looks like the water's sparkling once you add these bits in. Hopefully you'll see what I mean and agree that they just kind of finish the whole thing off. So that's us guys, that's us finished. Well done! If you've made it to the end of this video, then give me a big thumbs up, especially if you've been painting alongside me. I would love to see your finished pieces, so please feel free to tag me on Instagram with your work. And if you've just been watching for entertainment, then that's absolutely fine too. Maybe it's inspired someone to go and pick up a paintbrush and some oil paints. But yeah, if you want to keep updated with my latest videos, hit the subscribe button, and I shall see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Bye.